Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Ben, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. Is uniformity attainable? Millions of innocent men, women, and children since the introduction of Christianity have been burnt, tortured, fined, imprisoned, yet we have not advanced 1 inch toward uniformity. What has been the effect of coercion? To make one half of the world fools and the other half hypocrites. To support roguery and error all over the earth. Force cannot give right. So that's just a passage from this book here, Light and Liberty, Reflections on the Pursuit of Happiness. These are basically quotes from Thomas Jefferson, and also a Jeffersonian book, the Jefferson Bible by Peter Manseau. This is a biography of that book. Now, I read both of these books for Historathon Q3. Historathon is a year-long reading event where we read, discuss, and celebrate nonfiction history. We split the year up into 4 quarters, and Q3 looks at the years 1500 to 1820. And I find Jefferson to be endlessly fascinating. I recognize that he is deeply flawed, but I still think that he's a fascinating person. And so these are both pretty small books, and I figured, yeah, pretty much at the end of August, I barely squeezed these in. So let's start with, well, it's difficult to know which one to start with. I guess I'll start with this one. I actually read this one first, but it might be worth starting with this one. So, the Jefferson Bible, a biography. This is from Princeton University Press, part of their, the Lives of the Great Religious books. And this is about the creation of the Jefferson Bible and also the kind of life that it had over the centuries. So Jefferson was, he was really a kind of a skeptic. I don't think that, atheist would not be accurate. Most people during his time would not have considered themselves atheists. This is before Darwin had his Origin of Species published, and there wasn't really much explanation for how things got to be where they were. But, at most he was a deist, but he definitely really was not a Christian. Not in the sense that he believed that Jesus was divine, that he died and rose from the dead, or anything like that. But he did look at Jesus as a moral teacher, and not the only moral teacher, but certainly one that was influential and that was worthy of listening to, so long as you can get through all of the other kind of religious baggage that comes with him. I'm just kind of speaking, Jefferson's attitude towards things. And baggage that he had believed was, saddled upon Jesus, the moral teacher, by subsequent priests and things like that, who probably were more interested in, coercing and manipulating people rather than actually living Jesus' teachings. What he did late in life was he took a couple editions of the Bible in different languages, and he cut them up. Like, he literally took a razor to them, and he made his own edition. I think it was called The Life and Moral Teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. It takes out any kind of reference of the supernatural or anything like that, and it really just tries to give as close as he can an account of the man, the teacher, Jesus, and get to the root of his moral teachings. And this is something that he worked on in his old age. It's something he probably consulted quite a bit. It was something that he only, some people, like people close to him, knew that it existed. It's not something he advertised at all. But he did engage with the topic very seriously. And of course, after he dies, this is when it becomes a little more well known that it exists. But really, especially, it seems it was many, many decades later when it was found amidst various collections that it starts taking on a life of its own, especially in the late 1800s and then throughout the early 1900s. And the book goes into the sort of, biography of Jefferson and the creation of it, and then it goes into the different eras in which people seem to keep rediscovering this thing. And sometimes it's held up as, an example of, pure kind of Enlightenment principles, moral, religious pluralism. Other people, will at different times have condemned it as an attack on religion. But he goes through like the various people who sort of rediscovered it and popularized it, and when it was shown, like for instance at the Smithsonian. And it's interesting. It's not a very long read, and it's this book that gives us some nice images. But it only runs, let's see, it's less than 200 pages. And the print is kind of small, but you can see they're not big pages at all. And yeah, I was just seeing if there was another image that I might have forgotten about. Not many images in the middle. But yeah, it's kind of a concise little journey through time, trying to see American history through the lens of the Jefferson Bible. So I found this really interesting, and I wanted to discuss this one first because it also serves as sort of an inspiration for this. This is kind of a weird book. So we have Light and Liberty, Reflections on the Pursuit of Happiness. Okay, well, I'll get to this, I guess. This is edited by Eric S. Petersen. So essentially, these are like a bunch of quotes from Jefferson on various topics. Now, what Petersen has done is something very similar to what Jefferson did with the Bible. Jefferson not only cut out pieces of the Bible and, kind of glued them onto those pages there, he also would take various parts of it and combine them to, basically create one moral lesson. Even if those two things come from different parts of the Bible, he glued them together. So he was editing his own Bible in very many ways, right? So he was kind of creating new quotes out of two. And this is also what Petersen is doing. These are not quotes that we see in context that are intact. A lot of times what we have here is a block of a quote, and it could be from 2, maybe even 3 sources. Most of these sources are from letters, letters that Jefferson wrote to friends. So Petersen kind of, cuts and pastes them in ways where they seem to make a coherent quote on a topic. And we have things like, here's a chapter on silence. The quote that I read earlier about, really about religion, that was in the section being true to yourself. Now, I think that this is an interesting thought experiment. There's also a danger here in the way that this is kind of put, is that it comes off as kind of hagiographic. Like this is, somebody is not going to walk away really knowing Jefferson the person. This presents kind of an idealized sage version of Jefferson. And, if anybody knows anything about Jefferson, he is deeply flawed. I think he had moments of brilliance and moments where, he was certainly looking in the right direction of history. And there's other times when, he was a hypocrite. And he seems to have known that he was a hypocrite. He's not the only founder that was a hypocrite. But I think he has the most stark lessons to be learned about certain things like this. So in the introduction, and by the way, this is from Everyman Library, in the introduction, Petersen gives us kind of a very quick bio of who Jefferson was. It doesn't get into any of the controversies, and it seems to kind of bemoan the fact that people have found criticism with Jefferson. He kind of looks back fondly on bygone days, like in the 1940s when the Jefferson Monument went up, when people were just kind of, I guess, fawning over him. And that's kind of the version that we end up getting from this. So it can be misleading. It's not that the stuff that Jefferson says in here is bad. He was a very good writer, and he has some really great advice. It's just that you're taking that advice out of the context of the man. So it's very limited in those ways. There's some things that I think are kind of cool. A little bit insight into Franklin. This is something that it was a rule which, quote, made Dr. Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, the most amiable man in society, never to contradict anybody. If he was urged to announce an opinion, he did it rather by asking questions, as if for information, or by suggesting doubts. You get these little kinds of insights into the other founding fathers and how they dealt with things like disagreement, which those are little tidbits that I found really interesting. But we have other passages like this that, if you know anything about Jefferson, ends up being an interesting choice, to have in here. He has this, never buy what you do not want because it is cheap. It will be dear to you. Never spend your money before you have it. We shall all consider ourselves unauthorized to saddle posterity with our debts and morally bound to pay them ourselves, and consequently within what may be deemed the period of a generation or the life of the majority, having seen the people of all of the nations bowed down to the earth under the wars and prodigalities of their rulers, I have cherished their opposites, peace, economy, and riddance of public debt, believing that these are the high road to public as well as to private prosperity and happiness. So of course he's basically, he's advocating frugality there and paying off your debts. And he died in enormous debt and had to have his slaves basically sold off to try and help pay for it. He was somebody who couldn't stop spending, especially on books, and yeah, guilty as charged. I kind of get it. But, you can come away with a very deep misunderstanding of Jefferson, the person, because you've gotten this sort of idealized, little booklet of sayings. So I'm kind of mixed on something like this. I think that if you know what you're getting into, if you know about Jefferson already, you get a lot of kind of cool quotes out of this. If this is your first, step towards Jefferson, I think you should read a biography or something like that first. But, again, this is inspired by one of Jefferson's most controversial works, the Jefferson Bible. So I also find it really intriguing in that way. So yeah, these are the two things that I read for quarter 3 of Historathon, both dealing with Thomas Jefferson. So there was the Jefferson Bible, a biography, and Light and Liberty, Reflections on the Pursuit of Happiness. If you read any of these, love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.